Hi everyone, I hope you're really well. Welcome, or indeed welcome back to the channel. If you are new, don't forget to hit subscribe because today we've got an update video in terms of Yves Saint Laurent's All Hours foundation. Yes, it has reached that time where I've been experimenting with this foundation quite a bit since my initial first impressions video, and I have got to the point where I'm ready to let you guys know what I think about it and whether ultimately this is something I would want to spend my pennies on and get the full size, because I do just have a quite generous sample of it here. So like I said at the very beginning, this is the update video, so if you want to see a lot of detail about the foundation, including how I applied it and my first impressions after wearing it, then check out my first impressions video because that goes into quite a lot of detail. This video still will go into quite a bit of detail, but this is more about how I've been getting on experimenting with the foundation. So the first impressions is just the foundation on its own with no primers or setting powders. This video is all about how I've got on playing around with other things, because if you did watch that first impressions video, you'll know that like with most other foundations, I struggled with the glowy, oily situations. So I wanted to see if that could be salvaged at all. I also think it's worth experimenting with other products as well, just so that we can see whether it messes or interferes with the foundation at all, or whether it enhances it and makes it actually a lot better. So in terms of what we'll be covering in this video, we will be having a quick recap, just in case you've forgotten any of the finer details of this foundation, just so that we can remind ourselves and know exactly what it is that we're talking about. That recap will also include swatches as well, so if you're keen to see swatches of this foundation, then there will be swatches included in this video. I'll then be talking about how I got on testing the foundation and what products I used, and did I ultimately come out with a preferred combination of different products or tools. And then lastly, it will be down to my final conclusions. So what did I make of this foundation overall, and ultimately would I want to pick this foundation up in the full size? First things first, let's have a quick reminder of what this foundation is all about. It will set you back £33.50 for 25ml, and I did mention this in the first impressions video that obviously 25ml is not a standard size. Most foundations come in 30ml, so when you first look at it, £33.50 doesn't seem like too bad a price, but actually if you work out what the 30ml equivalent would be, it actually takes it up to £40.20, so it is quite a pricey foundation. But then at the same time, it is a designer brand, so it kind of goes with the territory as well. It's got a pretty decent SPF of 20 and it promises medium to full coverage, which I would agree with. It gives a very quick and easy medium coverage. I wouldn't necessarily say you can get it up to full coverage. I think full coverage foundations nowadays, you expect it to obliterate everything and be completely covering of anything you've got going on. I've not been able to get it up to that point, but I have been able to get it up to a pretty decent high level of coverage, and I'll talk a little bit more about the tools that I use to do that in just a second. It promises to give a soft matte finish, which I definitely don't agree with. When used on its own, it's definitely more of a satin, sort of natural skin finish, which I think for a lot of people who don't have oily skin are probably going to absolutely love that. But if you've got oily skin, then it's just going to become more and more glowy as the day goes on. So if you're expecting a finish where it is definitely more matte, you're not going to get that. It's much more of a satin and natural finish foundation. They also say it's suitable for all skin types, which I suppose technically it is, but in my experience I would say it's much better suited for normal to dry skin, because it doesn't cling to any dryness at all and it doesn't cake or anything. So it's definitely more suited for those kind of skin types. In terms of oilier skin, you are going to need to prepare your skin before and after using this foundation. And then lastly, it comes in 22 shades, and that's both in the UK and the US. And if we have a quick look at the shades, these are swatches actually from Yves Saint Laurent themselves. These are all of the 22 shades, and straight away you'll probably notice that the swatches in the middle are all really similar looking. So in my non-professional opinion, this foundation does look like it caters more for the light to medium skin tone. The shade that I personally have is BR30, and again you'll notice that that's sitting within that middle area, and generally speaking, in more drugstore kind of foundations, I'm definitely more in the light to medium skin tone. So this foundation, upon looking at swatches, does look like it leans more light to medium, and there really isn't much there being catered for a deeper skin tone. But like I said, I'm not really qualified to talk about these things because I think only really makeup artists who would apply this foundation on lots of different skin tones could probably really fairly answer that. So I'm just judging it on what I can see here. If we compare that shade that I'm in, BR30, to other foundations that I use, you'll notice straight away that actually it looks really deep in those swatches compared to the other ones that I wear. And incidentally, all of these shades I can actually wear. The Revlon Colorstay one, which is 150 buff, is ever so slightly too light for me, but I can actually get away with wearing all of these. And the most comparable shade that's there in terms of what I'm wearing in Yves Saint Laurent is probably the L'Oreal Infallible Matte in Vanilla, which is the second shade up in that shade range for that foundation. So it does seem to cater pretty well to light to medium skin tones, and although it looks really dark on my arm there, it actually blends out to not be quite so dark as it would appear. So talking about the actual claims of this foundation, they're saying it will blur pores and fine lines, and I would agree with this. It definitely does do those things, but I think it does that in a way that it just doesn't exacerbate what's already there, because most foundations will tend to either cling to fine lines or cling to your pores or sit in your pores a little bit funny, whereas this foundation just blends so beautifully. It's not so much blurring the pores and fine lines, it's just not accentuating them, and in doing that it does give the appearance of it blurring them. Next, they say it gives uninterrupted flawless wear up to 24 hours. Now, I have not tested this foundation for 24 hours because I do need to sleep at some point, but I would say for a typical day's wear it would give you really, really good coverage for a decently long time. It doesn't seem to fade too much at all. Related to that, they're saying it won't cake, dry, flake or fade, and for the most part I would agree with that. It definitely doesn't cake, dry or flake. It seems to move really nicely with the skin, and it stays like that all day as well. It doesn't cling to dry patches, and it just looks really beautifully natural on the skin. The only thing I would say is it does fade a little bit in some areas, but you would expect that, and whether that's because of the fact that I've got oily skin and it's the oils that are interfering with it, I'm not sure. So you probably do have a higher chance of it lasting a lot better if you've got more normal to dry skin. Next, they say that it's transfer proof and non-pore clogging. In terms of non-pore clogging, I've kind of covered that already. I would say that it is. It definitely doesn't sit in pores at all. It just gently kind of masks them and makes them look a little bit less obvious. But I've certainly not experienced any breakouts from using this foundation at all, so that's fantastic. In terms of transfer proof, it isn't, but it certainly performs a lot better than most other foundations that I've used. One day it was really tested when my little boy decided to throw himself at me, and he planted himself on my face with his chest, and I was just preparing myself for how much foundation was going to be on his top, and there was hardly anything. There was a little bit, so I was actually quite impressed with that, but it's definitely not completely transfer proof. They also say it will give a fresh, comfortable feeling which will last day to night, and I would pretty much go along with that. It does definitely feel comfortable all day long. As for saying it's fresh, well, Again, I think when you've got oily skin, you do get to a point in the day where you do just want to take your makeup off, but it's not as bad as some of the foundations that I've tried, so I would go along with that for the most part. And then lastly, in terms of fighting the look of dullness and fatigue, because it's supposed to have some kind of black tea antioxidants in it, I don't know whether that is a little bit of a gimmick, but it does certainly feel very comfortable for the most part, and my skin does look pretty decent for most of the day instead of starting to look very tired and sad. So yes, I suppose for the most part I probably agree with that one too. So in terms of the testing phase of this foundation, and I've got a few things here to talk about in terms of it, I'll just quickly talk about tools first. I've got a few different tools here that I've successfully used with this foundation. It applies really beautifully with any brush that I've tried it with. I've got a flat top kabuki here, which is the Zoeva 104. I've got a toothbrush or paddle brush here from Pure, and I've also got this foundation brush from It Cosmetics, which is much softer and movable, and it actually applies really beautifully with all three of these. I've got it on my face today and I use the It Cosmetics brush with this, and even though it's really quite bendy, it does just apply the foundation really beautifully. My preferred application method for this foundation is I like to put a very light layer on everything first, because you don't really need the same level of foundation across your whole face, and then next, to build it up a little bit more in areas that I do need a bit more coverage, I just grab a damp sponge, and this one in particular is just a L'Oreal, I think it's called the Professional sponge, I'm not sure, but I'll have the details of all these products down in the description box. And I just dot it on the areas where I need a little bit more coverage, and then obviously just pat it in, and that works really well. There's just something about that combination of doing a very quick light layer with a brush and then building it up with a sponge in a few particular areas just seems to give me the best and most beautiful finish. I find if I try and use the sponge on its own, it just takes far too long, and if I use the brush on its own, when I try to build it up, it doesn't quite blend quite so nicely as it would do with the sponge. And then in terms of the products that I've needed to use to just help this foundation work a little bit better when it comes to my oily skin, I've got these two primers here, both from Hylamide. We've got the HA Blur and the Matte 12. Now HA Blur, once I discovered how to use it properly, because you're supposed to mix it with your foundation, works really nicely, but it's not quite enough on its own to control any oils. But then this isn't really meant to control oils, it's more about blurring what's going on your skin, and it just makes most foundations go on a lot nicer. So I've been really enjoying using this, but this primer here in particular seems to work really well for helping the oiliness situation. And the best way to use this is you put a little bit on the back of your hand and then you rub it on your fingertips. I just do this, and then you just lightly press it into your skin, which does feel like a bit of an odd thing to do, but it really does help control the oils with this foundation. And then just to make sure that it's properly blended in, I really lightly just bop over the top of it, just to make sure that there's no kind of excess product anywhere at all. And then just to make sure I get the longest wear possible out of this in terms of my oils, I then finish with a little bit of Coty Airspun, and I just concentrate this on the areas that I know I'm going to have difficulty with. So I'll pop a little bit on my forehead and on my cheeks and on my nose, and then I'll just dust off any excess. So it really is just a little light layer of this. That probably sounds like a lot of products to use in and around this foundation, and I know it is, and it makes the process of putting this foundation on quite time consuming, which is really frustrating. So if you do have oily skin, it might be worth trying, but it does take quite a lot to get it to work. You can definitely get there. There are some foundations I've tried recently that I've tried everything with and I haven't got there, but you can definitely get there with this one, and a primer and a setting powder goes a really long way to help with the oiliness situation. However, if you're more normal to dry, I think you'd be able to skip most of that, and as long as your skin was really nicely moisturised, then you could just get on with putting the foundation on, and I think you'd probably be okay with just the foundation on its own, because it does give a really beautiful finish on the skin that looks very natural, very skin-like, and if it wasn't for the fact that I was oily, I would definitely just leave that alone because it looks unbelievably natural. It does look like that is actually what your skin is like. And I think ultimately for most people, that's what we're trying to achieve when it comes to foundation, is the illusion of the fact that yes, that is what our skin actually looks like. Before I found this combination of products that actually worked really quite well, I did try some other products on their own, including some of these here, and you can see that I had varying degrees of success. Upon initial application, the foundation looks amazing. It's the kind of foundation where you'll keep looking in the mirror and think to yourself, wow, it looks absolutely amazing and very, very natural. But it's just the oiliness situation that for me was problematic, and that's why in the end I had to use a real combination of products. But it was definitely helped by using primers and powders. So if you weren't too oily like I am, then you could probably get away with just using a primer or a powder on its own, and it would just make the foundation look matte and keep you matte that little bit longer. So in terms of my final conclusion on this foundation, I've actually really enjoyed wearing it once I found a combination of products that actually worked for me. It's a beautiful looking foundation that, like I said, looks unbelievably natural on the skin. It doesn't cling to any dry bits, and I've definitely got dry bits going on, and it didn't accentuate any of this area at all. And actually throughout the day it just continued to cover that area really well. It does fade a little bit. It's kind of this area in particular and my nose, but that could possibly be just where I've been touching my face and things. So it is actually a decently long wearing foundation, which even if you need to touch up at some point in the day because you have got a bit oily and maybe you want to blot or something, it doesn't interfere with the foundation underneath, and you can continue with that really nice level of coverage on your face for the rest of the day. I really like how it applies. It does actually apply quite quickly. It just takes that little bit longer for me because there are quite a few steps in terms of sorting out the oiliness situation. But like I keep saying, if you've got normal to dry skin, I think you'd be really pleasantly surprised with how quickly and effortlessly this foundation just blend into the skin and look very natural and give you a very easy medium coverage, or if you need to, just to build it up in a few areas too, you can get there really quite quickly. In terms of the price, obviously it has a luxe price tag because this is Yves Saint Laurent at the end of the day, but it's that 5ml less which I'm a little bit confused about, which just makes this foundation seem so much more expensive, and I don't know how quickly you'd get through it. That being said, I've been using this sample a ton and there's still loads left in here, so I think probably the full size would actually last quite a long time because you really don't need that much to get a pretty nicely decent level of coverage. I am quite tempted to pick this up in the full size. I think it's a really nice foundation. The only thing that's kind of holding me back is the fact that I already have a ton of foundations that I need to work my way through and try, and I kind of feel like, is there a foundation out there for me that's going to do all of the things that I want it to do without having to take all the extra steps as well? I don't mind adding a little bit extra to it, but I kind of feel like this is taking a lot of steps just to get a foundation to last throughout the day. But that being said, I really do love the level of coverage and how natural it looks. So it's a tricky one. I think for the moment I will continue to hunt for my perfect holy grail foundation that will just tick all of the boxes of what I'm looking for, but I certainly won't forget about this one because it's really been a pleasure to use, and I will happily use this sample up until it's all gone and then move on to something else because, like I said, I have really liked using it. It looks really beautiful on the skin, and I can't believe how lucky I was in colour matching this because this shade is pretty perfect. I don't think I could have done any better if I tried. So that's it for this video. I really hope that you enjoyed it. I'm now looking forward to having a good rummage around my makeup drawer just to see what other foundations I've got to test because, like I said, I'm pretty sure I've got quite a few in there, and there's one in particular that I'm really excited about. So I think I'll be grabbing that one next. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful because this is a foundation that you're considering for yourself, I would really appreciate a thumbs up down below because it does really help support my channel. And if you are new and would like to subscribe to see more content like this from me in the future, I will pop a button just here, so you can click it and just get notified of new content as and when it gets uploaded. And if you've not seen my last video, I will pop a link to that one just up here so you can click it and check that one out too. Anyway, I hope you're all really well and I will see you again soon. Bye!